Hi, I'm Ron Paulk. This is my smart wood shop. If you want to get any of the plans for one of my smart workbenches, any of the accessories that work with them, or the smart wood shop itself, there's a link in the description of this video down below. You can go there, purchase plans, and within minutes you'll get a receipt and download them. This happens 24/7, 365. This is the Paulk Smart LR32 MFT. Wow, that's a mouthful. A couple of weeks ago, I put out the Smart LR32 jig. That jig was designed, and it's in here, to take the Festool LR32 and make it usable. The Paulk Smart LR32 jig plans, which I put out just a couple of weeks ago for a measly $5, have been well received. Those plans I've taken down. They're no longer available, but they've been replaced by the LR32 MFT. To be clear, it's the Paulk Smart LR32 MFT jig. Those that adopted the first set of plans from a couple of weeks ago, you have no cost access to the new set of plans. The old plans were $5. The new plans, which have a lot more to them, are $10, but you get them. All you got to do is ask, or the office might even just send them to you automatically. Again, it's been very popular, and I don't want to have something out just a couple of weeks and then totally change it and have you go, ugh. So take care of the FAM, the Smart Wood Shop FAM. So what is this? Well, again, it has the LR32 in it. So this will make the cabinet sides. It's all laid out for that. What I've added to it is 2 pieces of plywood. 13 days to come up with 2 pieces of plywood. This long piece here with these 20 millimeter holes spaced at 32 millimeters. So the MFT stop portion, this piece of wood here, was pretty easy to make. Ripped it to a specific size, cut it to a specific length, and used the track to do these holes. Now you do have to purchase a 20 millimeter bit. It's pretty straightforward and easy to use. Although I do have to say up front, building it's a bit tough. You have to be very precise. After you cut the first set of holes 32 millimeters in, and the second set of holes 96 millimeters in, with this attachment, which I'll show you in just a minute, once those 2 rows are done, then you'll start to do the rest of them. And it's a matter of just simply dropping a bench dog in to the holes that you just drilled, and then taking the router and doing the next set of holes. Now, unlike the cabinet holes where we drill every single hole, 32 millimeter spacing, here we don't need holes. We need them at 96 millimeter, with the exception of the first set of holes all the way around, which are 32 millimeters in. That's my MFT system, my ad. I find those to be very useful for clamping on the edge. I don't need any T-tracks or anything. This stuff does all of that. Plus, a lot of my accessories use that outside hole. My door panel jigs that work off the side for planing and hinging doors and doing edge banding. Also, my crosscut jig uses these as well. So that extra row of holes, they're sweet. So I got this set up to do that. It's important that you mark these holes because you will get off if you're not paying attention. So you see that red mark, and it's done with just a crayon, so it'll wipe right off. But then I'm able to go down and make the cuts. Boom, boom, boom. It goes pretty quick. And then that new set of holes will be drilled. And then we go to the next. And these bench dogs can drop in any of the holes because they're all lined up the same. And then boom, 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 again, again, again. This is where I have to give a big warning, a disclaimer. If you don't create this very accurately, your error will be multiplied. And I don't care how good you measure. This is a tough one to do. That's why it took me 13 days. I did get it right, but I used up almost 2 sheets of plywood. I've given the dimensions, but what I recommend you do is take a piece of scrap wood, plywood, 18 mil, It doesn't have to be, you know, lightweight or anything quality, just whatever you have. And it doesn't even have to be the full width, but long enough that you can get at least 5 holes going this way. Instead of drilling these 2 holes in this and 2 holes in this, that's your critical, this is your critical measurement, because this is going to set the distance between the last set of holes drilled and the next set of holes. This is a fixed, there's no adjusting this. You know, that's great. Festool eliminates any error there, but the spacing from where this hole is drilled and where the last hole is, again, is very critical. And if you're off 1/10 of a millimeter, by the time you're 10 holes up, you're a millimeter off. And you want these lined up. I am going to say I still think ultimately the best is the Paulk Mark II, because it uses the hypotenuse, and so you get the 3, 4, 5, you got the rulers, you do the pilot holes, everything's dropped in with pins. It's as accurate as the CNC. This one's going to depend on your ability to lay this out. So the way that I got mine to work, I actually drilled these holes. I was just very careful and drilled them out and had them perfect. And I drilled a set of holes and measured, and it said 96 millimeters. And then I cut a hole bench top, and the holes were perfect in alignment across here. When I dropped the bench dogs in anywhere on that top and used this TSO triangle, which is accurate to within 1/1000th of an inch, everything was perfectly square. But by the time I got to the other end, I was off 2 millimeters this way. So meaning that bench laid on top of this bench, I couldn't drop the bench dogs through. This bench top was made with the Paulk Mark II. It is just nuts on CNC, and so I'm using that to test, get my tool right. So I went back, I just got some dowel, I filled the holes with dowel, glued, you know, let it dry for a bit, then sanded them off. I did it again. It was still off, just a tiny amount. And so I plugged them again. And then instead of drilling the holes again with measurement, I actually laid this across here, had the holes plugged, and I clamped these, a couple of clamps, and just made sure that it was not going to move. And then I took a piece of scrap and I cut a series of 5 holes. And again, I didn't do the full width, although that's fine as well. But mainly you want to have, you know, wide enough you can do, you know, a couple of holes. You don't have to do them all the way across, just one on one side, one on the other. And then 5 sets, so you can be dropping these in and cutting your sample piece. But do at least 5, more is better, because your error is going to be multiplied by that number. So when I get 5 rows in this way, my error is going to be multiplied 5 times. So it's going to show up, and it'll make it easier to adjust. So I did that, and I got it to, with it clamped, I got it where it was just working and it was perfect. Once I got there, I took the 20 millimeter bit, chucked it into a drill. I used one of these things. Maybe this wasn't necessary, but this kept it good and flat. And I just, and again, they were clamped, and I knew right where to go. And then I drilled in carefully all 4 holes, and then I did another test cut. So at this point, I'm not planning on doing a build video. That's why I'm taking a few minutes to tell you about that one trick. Building the LR32, which I did do a video on, and I'll still have that linked in the plans. Again, it's different now, but it'll at least help you get, you know, where you want to go. You want that very accurate too, because that's doing your offsets from the edge, which on all cabinets, it doesn't matter what you're doing, has to be exactly 37 millimeters to the 5 millimeter holes. But if you're off 1/10 or a little bit, 1/2 millimeter probably even, you're only doing 1 set of holes, so you're not going to multiply your error. And all of the hinges and drawer, everything that uses those holes, there's a little adjustability in them. So it's again, you want to make this as accurate as possible, but it's not as critical because you're just doing the one set. On this one, again, you're going to do, you know, I don't know, 20 holes across or 20 something. Your error is going to be multiplied by that many. So this is challenging. Like I said, 13 days, no kidding, and a couple pieces of plywood to get, you know, to where I'm at. This was my final test piece, and I made it the full width of the bench top. I just cut it shorter. I had already done a full length one, and as I told you, that one's over there, and it's not any value to me because it's off. Even though it's a tiny amount, and even though it's perfectly square, the spacing is off just enough. So this one has the 32, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. The first row of 32 is done with this offset jig, and you're not referencing off of that. So if that were off a tiny amount, and again, you want it perfect, but it's not going to, it's gonna still work because it's right there and it's one row and you're not referencing. The second set of holes is done with this, the main row in that you're gonna reference off of. Again, that you're only doing that first system set, and it's going right off the edge. It's important that this board is built properly. This one's a lot easier to build. Again, without these holes drilled, I clamped it underneath and set it up, and actually took my router and had a line at 96 and a line at 32, and then I took my, you know, had that on there clamped in, and took my router and just popped the tip in. I didn't cut, and the dimple that it made, I was able to see it right on the cross line. So I got those two. Those were pretty easy to get just right. But then after that, it's from that first system set was what we're referencing off of. And so here, this is the sample, and these are tight dogs, so you know, they still are, you know, can be challenging to get in, but they're right there. All right, and so now with it lined up, I can take this and test. And again, sometimes they're snug because these are full, these are those TSO full 20 millimeter, but you can see that every dog hole works. So it's gonna work with the system. So out there on the 5th hole, I'm still lined up, so I can depend on it going the rest of the way. What's most impressive though is for square, absolutely touching all 4 dogs perfectly. That part was not difficult to get just right. Even the one where they were spaced off going that way, the squareness was perfect. So again, I just want to emphasize, if you take on this project and you want to do the MFT portion of it, you may have some frustrations. I give you the numbers, but you've really, it's going to come down to you of, you know, drilling them in the right spot. All of the other hardware was on the original plan, and it still remains the same. What's been added is these 2 pieces of plywood and these TSO Smart Connects and the star knobs. These were the bench dogs that TSO created with my input. You need 6 of these. They're not that expensive. They come in pairs, the knobs come in pairs, and they're usable for other things, other accessories. These are a great tool to have. And I have, I probably have about 30 of these with the knobs. So 6 of these, and that's the 2 each side to connect the MFT rail to the LR32 side mounts. And then the other 2 mounts the MFT offset. So this offset is only used to drill the first row at 32 millimeter and the first system holes at 96. And they're marked and they go with this hole there. So this is pretty easy to set up. So the first row of holes, I want to start at the 32. I've got them marked, so there's a direction. This thing is not reversible. And on the plans, I've marked an arrow this and an arrow on this. to know that which way they go. When I was building this, after I got this all set up, I took this board here, and before I drilled the holes, I clamped it in place and took my router, and I just had a line across my sample piece or my test piece, and I took my router and I just punched down with the tip of the bit, and it, until I got it dialed in, and again with a clamp right there. Again, I have the measurements on the plans, but I just find that sometimes it's better to sneak up on things. So I got it just right. It was clamped. With that all done, then I actually drilled the hole through this and this together. With the first row of holes, I like the clamp. So the clamp fits right on the edge of the bench, and it's out of the way of the router. Top is the one cut with the Paulk Guide Mark II. If I drop it on one of these, right in the hole. So you can see that I've done my testing, and I got this thing just, oh, not a hole there, right dialed in. So at that point, with it clamped off and knowing that it was going to work, with, again, just pushing this tip down, and it puts a little dimple in, and I was able to see right that it was falling on my layout marks. Knew it was just right. Then with this all clamped in, I took my drill bit with the 20mm bit, the same setup that I showed you before, and I got right on that point, to where I was, and just went, because I had laid it out again for the 32 and then the 64 in on both. And then I was able to drill through both boards and line that up. So next, I want to have that first row of 96. That's the forward set of holes. So I have to push the clamp in another 64mm. It's the difference between the two. Maybe this camera will show it, but this row of holes here, which is going to be our offset holes, from the center to the center is 96, which means the center of this row of holes is right on the edge of the bench, so I can see it. The bench is bisecting this row of holes, which is why I can't use a bench dog to start. When I do this row of holes, I do the same clamping. So the first row and the second row, I clamp so they won't move. And there you can see that I go in every hole. I've got a label that's MFT offset, the direction it goes on, which holes are for what, and the hardware. The hardware is not that expensive. I'd rather have it dedicated so that I can grab this out and use it. Now the third set of holes, or the first set we're going to do with the dogs, now I move the jig up to that first set of that 96mm set of holes that we just drilled, and then use a couple of bench dogs, and there you have it. So I know that I've got this set up and working, so I can now make a top. Now I could pull these bench dogs and move it all the way down and drop it in. That wouldn't reveal any error, because I'd still be going from the last set that were perfectly cut with the Paulk Guide Mark II to the next set. And if I was only off a 1/10 of a millimeter, it's not going to show up. So I really needed to drill it on a piece of scrap. And again, you don't have to do the full width. You could do half the width, or just so you got a starter set of holes and then another set, because you want to get the squaring right and make sure that's all set up, and then do at least 5, not counting the first 32, because that row is done with the offset and it's not used for anything else for reference, so it's not going to tell you anything. And then the first set of holes will be done with the offset, but then the next row of holes is going to be done with the bench dog from the first set and on. And again, at least 5. If you want to do more, if you want a long piece of scrap, the more you do, the easier it is going to be for you to see any error. I know I'm spending a lot of time on that, but I've got to emphasize 13 days, a lot of it. I tried different things, independent ones on both sides, and trying to get things squared. It was just having to do this full piece, figuring out where to drill these holes and getting these system holes exactly where they are. And everything is laid out so that I added the squaring block to the LR32. The original one didn't have it. That helps me square up to lay out these holes, exactly 32 millimeters wide. And then from the backside all the way to here is 500 millimeters. This piece I think is 182 millimeters. So I've got it all set up so that all the pieces kind of flush up and it makes it easier to square. You can see I took my time to get it right. And hopefully all the hours that I have into this will, obviously all of the things I've done that didn't work, you don't have to go through. And if you just take your time and sneak up on this, you'll get it right. The plans are even slightly different than what you see here. I've made a few minor adjustments, a few millimeters here and there just to clean things up. I've made this a little shorter, move these in a little bit, move these holes in, I think 64 both ways. I just made it cover a wider range by doing that. So if I want to do something skinnier with mine, I'll have to actually drill some new holes and move those in. So I took care of that on the plans. That's all there is to the MFT portion. 2 pieces of plywood and then 6 of these TSO Smart Connects or Quick Connect. This is the LR32 portion, the blocks and the side pieces. So the setup for the MFT, in addition to having the piece of MFT rail that goes across here and set up in these holes, is the right side is mounted on the left and the left side is mounted on the right. So I've quit calling them left and right. I have the K2, that's for the KISS 2 side. That's the one that has, it's 3 millimeters narrower on this side and on this, and that way when I'm doing my cabinets, because I use the KISS 2 system, I need that multiple of 32 plus 6 millimeters. So that K2 side gives me that. When I'm doing the MFT, I want the spacing between these to be exactly 32. Although I've got mine tight on 32 and it's a little tight. I think I may run these through the table saw. I'm not going to show this on the plans, but I think I'm going to run these through the table saw and just take a whisker off, just because on the bench they're just tight to move around, and I think if I had a little more room it'd be a little better. But anyway, so to set it up for the LR32, I have to swap these. On the plans I show the marking for K2 for KISS 2, and on the other side I've got T32, which is true 32, but on the plans I put MFT. So we know that the MFT and the true 32 are the same. So I want to do now that I'm going to set up for cabinets, I'm going to set the K2 on so they face each other. Whichever one you're working with, the MFT, they go inside, and if you're doing the cabinets or the K2 system, they go on the inside. MFT or the true 32 side is what Festool gives you, and it's what almost all systems out there are. The KISS 2 is an improvement on that. I do not use true 32 for my cabinets. I did 20 years ago when I set up my first cabinet shop, but there are some issues with it to do with drawers. You know, soft close drawers would lift up a little bit and it would interact with your overhangs. It had to do with door spacings and drawer spacings, and that extra 6 millimeters is, I didn't invent it. It was created and I adopted it. Squaring rails on the back, their only purpose is just to have it tied up to the rail, and of course I've drilled the holes and put the wood inserts in so that they're perfectly laid out on that true 32 line. So when I'm set up to do cabinets, all bases are 774, and the row of holes from the front edge, after the edge banding is applied, it's important to remember you're measuring finished, is then 37 millimeters, and I'm ready to cut. Of course, I'd have to take my 20 millimeter bit off and put on the 5. So with the Paulk Smart LR32 MFT jig, now I not only have the ability to do my cabinet sides efficiently, But when I have need to do an MFT with just 2 pieces of plywood, I can add to it, and then I can make a whole bench, or I can do the extensions, the router tables, or any of those little plates and things like for my wood clamps. Those are all lined up again to work with the system. So this will be really handy if you want to get yourself a detailed set of plans to build a Paulk Smart LR32 MFT for yourself. There'll be a link in the description of this video down below. Mahalo for hanging out with me in the Smart Wood Shop.